for the MassDOT petition to rezone property between Amory and Dayton. Armory, sorry.
Okay, great. This meeting of the Danvers Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which can be found posted on the town's website, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberation of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening remotely via the WebEx app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Supporting materials that have been provided members of this body will be shown during this transmission. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Several ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motions. Please hold until your name is called further. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to converse with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comments, we have established an email address for public comments @danversmass.gov. This email address is shown online with the streaming of this meeting. Residents may email comments. They will provide it read out loud after the staff has confirmed the names and address. All emails must contain the date and phrase Planning Board. Finally, each vote will be taken during this meeting by roll call vote. So the first item on the agenda, public hearings, proposed zoning amendment, rezoning of a certain parcel of land owned by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation on Newbury Street, Route 1, bound by Dayton Street, Armory Road, and Center Street. So I'll turn this over to the applicant. If you could just introduce yourself to the board as well as to the public that's watching, I'd appreciate it.
Very good. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Danvers Planning Board and staff. My name is Tom Cox. I work for a company called Greystone. We provide real estate services to MBTA and MassDOT in various capacities. I have on the call here with me today Craig McEwen, who is the Deputy Director of Real Estate with MassDOT, and Zach Worth, who works with me here at Greystone. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen and go through a brief presentation on MassDOT's request.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So let me know when you can see my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Right now, it's just dark.
Shoot. Unfortunately, my computer is frozen. Not sure what's going on. This hasn't happened.
Tom, this is David here. Would you like me to pull up your presentation and share my screen?
if you don't mind, that would be great.
Sure.
I may, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's going on here, and now I can't see you guys. So hold on one second. It's not funny. So I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on with my computer, but so I can hear you. So I'm gonna, if David, if you've got it up, I'm just gonna go through it. I apologize. I
No problem.
lost to be able to see you guys.
Just give me 1 second. Everyone see that?
Yes, now we can.
All right.
Did we lose Tom,
If you
though?
want to go ahead.
Looks like he's having bandwidth problems.
Yeah, I think we lost Tom.
All right, Zach or Craig, I don't want to put you on the spot.
So
but
I am back. I don't know what happened there. I apologize there, David. So sorry about that, everybody. Next slide, if you don't mind, David. So MassDOT owns this property that is shown here in red hash, bound by Newbury Street, Route 1, Center Street to the south, Amory Street to the west, and Dayton Street to the north. This property is completely located within what is called the roadway layout of Route 1. So it's not a separate parcel of land at this point in time. It's a piece of property that's located within the layout. As part of MassDOT's real estate division's overall initiative is it goes through its properties to find surplus pieces of real estate to offer for economic development here in the Commonwealth. This property has been identified internally as well as had external inquiries from various developers that have done transactions up there in Danvers. This property is presently not zoned at this point in time. So next slide. Property was acquired by MassDOT over two separate transactions, one in 1921 and 1949. The property was acquired for the purpose of constructing and maintaining Route 1. So this property in particular was part of a bigger acquisition and has now become basically deemed to be surplus at this point in time. So not just this piece of property was acquired, a bigger piece of property was acquired for the creation of the Cloverleaf, the local roadways, et cetera. As Danvers has put together its zoning maps across the community, they somehow haven't included this piece of land within a zoning district, rightfully so, right? It's not a piece of land that's been separately distinguished from the roadway layouts, and we find ourselves in a position where the property isn't presently zoned per the Danvers zoning map. Next slide. So you see here, the parcel is again bound by the red hash tags. You can see there in white is the roadway layout for MassDOT's Route 1. And this parcel of land 2 is shown in white and is not presently zoned. To the north, to the south, to the west, those properties, all immediately adjacent to the property, are located within the highway commercial district. And is exactly what we're asking for here tonight. Next slide. So not a lot of magic to kind of the request here is that we're asking for this parcel of land. It's approximately 79,000 square feet to be included within the adjacent zoning districts. The adjacent zoning district, the commercial highway commercial zoning district. For the ability to dispose of this property long term. Happy to answer any questions. I think you all know the zoning district and the allowed uses and et cetera. Happy to talk through that and defer to staff, but I don't want to be repetitive and state the obvious as well. So,
Okay, great. Jim, why don't we start with you?
I'm fine with it, John. It seems like a reasonable request.
Okay, great. Peg?
I have no problem with this either.
Okay, Tori?
This looks fine to me.
Lou?
Oops.
We can't hear you, Lou.
Might be easier to exit and come back in. That seems to be the trick when this is happening, but
Oh, I think did he give us a thumbs up?
He was all set. All right, we'll have a chance to come back. I don't have any questions either. So, David, Josh, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this?
I checked with Josh, but I don't believe we had anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter.
Yes, I concur with David. No one from the public reached out to discuss this matter tonight.
Okay. Let me just see. Has Lou come back?
Yeah, can you
Yeah, we can hear you now, Lou.
hear me now?
We can. Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Okay. The only question I did, Mr. Chair, may I ask my question? I wasn't sure if you moved on.
No, go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay. Yeah, just in terms of the, I know Mr. Cox, you mentioned in terms of long-term, potentially long-term uses. What are the, does the state have any current plans for the property? Are we looking at disposition in the long or short term?
That's correct. So to the extent that we received a favorable recommendation this evening, and then at town meeting in a couple of weeks, MassDOT will offer this property for public disposition through the public procurement process.
Okay. One further question: has there, in terms of understanding the sort of the corridor that it's generally in, have you received any sort of any comments at all from abutters, such as even, for example, like on Dayton Street?
No, we haven't received any comments from abutters. We've had some interest in the property from developers, but none from abutters.
Okay. Okay. Very good. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Since there's no questions or comments from the public, I'd like to have a motion to bring this public hearing to a close.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, so that was Jim and second by Peg.
Yes.
Lou? Are you in favor of
Yes.
the public hearing? Okay.
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Peg?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And I'm in favor of closing the public hearing. So now, Josh, or David, what are we doing? We're making a positive recommendation to the Finance Committee? Is that the next step in this process?
That would be correct. That's the next step here in Danvers.
All right, so is there a motion to forward this to town meeting with a positive recommendation?
So moved.
Second?
Second motion?
Okay, so we have a first from Jim, second from Lou. Peg?
Yes.
Tori?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And I'm in favor of that positive recommendation. So good luck, and we'll see you folks from MassDOT, I guess, in a few weeks.
Very good. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Well,
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you on behalf of the Commonwealth.
you're welcome. All right, so the next public hearing is proposed zoning amendment to the town of Danvers zoning bylaws regarding animal husbandry and associate definitions. So, David, I guess I turn it over to you to walk us through this zoning amendment.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to pass it over to Mr. Henry at this point. He's more involved in this one than I am. So, Aaron, were you going to share your screen, or you just want to talk it through? Oh, looks like you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just looking at the motion. I guess I would defer to the chair. Do you want me to pull up the motion that was included in the packet, or just talk you through it?
Ironically, the town meeting material showed up today at my house, so maybe for the benefit of people who aren't a town meeting member, if we can pull it up, that'd be great. I mean, the public can see it at the same time, right, when we share the screen?
Yes.
Okay, if we could do that, I think that'd be great.
Should be happening. Is that viewable at this point?
Yep, we can see that.
I can see it, yep.
Hopefully that fits in the entire screen. I apologize if it's not quite legible. It's a rather short motion. As you can see, all of the changes fit on a page. But let me back up and give a little context. Most town meeting members may recall that this was an issue that was originally scheduled to go before town meeting at the annual meeting of 2020, pre-COVID. Once COVID hit, we really went lean and mean on just the budget priorities and kind of dropped all the other articles, and this one unfortunately was part of that. So what caused us to draft this solution was an enforcement action in the R2 residential district of one party requesting enforcement of the animal husbandry prohibition in that zoning district on an abutting property. And while that case has gone through the system and we were in fact upheld, meaning our bylaw does prohibit the keeping of animals in the R2 district, I think the outcome left a sour taste in the mouths of many. And the selectmen in particular asked the planning department to try to come up with a modified version of the keeping of animals in town that was responsible, that encouraged a bit more of some of these, some of the trends in what I'll use the term urban agriculture is kind of coming back around. And we know a lot more about how to do this in a responsible manner. So we've drafted this article over the winter to try to do that. And the motion itself, to see if the town will amend the zoning bylaw, is drawn very broadly, such that should town meeting decide it wants to go in another direction, i.e. regulate more strictly than this proposal does, the scope of the motion is such that we can narrow ourselves down to that. As you guys know, town meeting can't broaden the scope, so once we advertise it, it has to fall within that range. So we drafted the language, the motion language broadly. The proposal itself that staff worked on and has worked with the selectmen who voted, I think 4-1 or 5-0. I apologize, I can't remember the vote last week at the selectmen's meeting to support this article as well. But really what we tried to do here was address a couple of issues, starting with our definitions. They were a bit outdated. One issue that came up in particular in the court action around enforcement was we did not have a definition of household pets. And so you'll see here that we're inserting that, and that came into the action a little bit in that there was an argument to be made that any animal, if you keep it, could be considered a household pet. We didn't quite think that jived with how people actually use animals and how some of these urban agriculture animals are penned. So we came up with a definition of household pet. It's not exhaustive, but we tried to cover what we typically see and hear of. And then we also basically removed and replaced the definition animal husbandry with keeping of animals on residential premises. And that's a little bit more of a, updated version of this. You'll also see then we move to the table of uses. And in this part of the motion, we're deleting stables as a separate use because that's now subsumed into this definition of animal husbandry. You'll see there that we're striking the former title and moving that to something called the keeping of animals on residential properties. The next part of that motion is where we would allow this use. Presently, animal husbandry is only allowed in the R2 district. Under this proposal, we are proposing that this be allowed in R1 and R3. R1 is generally our smallest district, and R2 slightly bigger at 20,000 square feet, and R3 I think starts at 30,000 square feet. While on paper, it might not make sense to see animals in a 5,000 or 10,000 square foot zoning district, the reality is we have lot sizes. We have several parcels in R1 that are very large. We have parcels in R3 that are very small. So this bylaw really tries to not get into that too much. A companion piece of this scheme is that the Board of Health has adopted regulations for the keeping of animals, and that has provisions about, and you'll see that for town meeting members and board members, you'll see that in your town meeting packet. You'll see a copy of the regulations, but basically there it's about the pen of the animal, waste management, and food management. It will be subject to, any pen outdoors will be subject to the principal setbacks of a structure. So again, you can't put one of these things on your lot line for your neighbor. But again, the size of the lot will be dealt with depending on the particular permit being sought, the number of animals, the type of animal, and the size of lot. So we think that's a much better way to go. It's a bit more labor intensive on the staff side, and that it will require every application to be individually reviewed. But we think given some of the issues that can arise from a poorly kept operation, that time investment's well worth it to make sure that we get it right for those cases when we do. So with that, that's it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
So Aaron, how has this changed from the last one we voted on before the annual town meeting? Has there been modifications?
No modifications to the proposal. We've revisited the regulations with the Board of Health. There's one aspect related to beekeeping that we're still working on, but as far as the keeping of animals and the zoning proposal, no change since probably February.
Okay. So since several of us had a chance to discuss this at the prior in the fall leading up to the annual meeting, Tori, I don't believe you were on the board, so let me turn it over to you if you got questions for Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to kind of put on my town meeting member hat here and just ask some clarifying things. Who is the permitting authority for these permits?
It'll be the health division.
So the current bylaw allows some keeping of animals by special permit under the ZBA, and we'd be removing that, so everything would be under health then?
Yes, we really try to make the expertise in regulating animals really does rest with the Board of Health. Does more of that on I'll say a day-to-day basis. It's probably more of a month-to-month basis, but asking the zoning enforcement officer, the building inspector in Danvers' case, to understand what's the best way to keep a dozen rabbits or 2 horses. He's better at telling you if the house is going to fall down or if the code inspections are going to pass. So we really wanted to find the right home for this, and the Board of Health already maintains what's called the barn book. They have a number of responsibilities under Mass General Law as it relates to the keeping of animals. due to their potential, effect negatively on public health should they be, improperly kept up. So we felt that that was the best place for enforcement and review of potential permits.
And then the structures that are involved, especially when we're talking about stables, which can be quite large, can I assume that those fall under the same regulations as anything else anyone's building? If somebody were to build a
Yes.
large stables, they might conceivably incur a site plan review depending on the size?
I suppose that could be the case, although generally speaking, ones in single and two family homes would, I don't know a situation that they would ever trigger site plan review in Danvers. But that said, there's a footnote, I apologize, Ed, in part 3 of the motion, number 3, you'll see us revising a note there to include the phrase, for all other structures, including those required for the keeping of animals, the principal setback shall apply. So again, this is a little bit to your point, I think, in that normally accessory structures in Danvers can get right up against the lot line. I think the setback is 5 feet. I will rely on David if he needs that citation specifically, but I know it's a much reduced setback for sheds and typical things. But with this, we didn't think that was an appropriate treatment, given that they could have, potentially, noxious or unpleasant issues if improperly kept. And so we felt that the regular setbacks were important to include.
That makes sense to me. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
You're welcome. Lou, did you get a chance to comment? Were you on the board when this went to the originally scheduled town meeting for the annual meeting? Or for the December meeting, I believe?
I don't believe so. I came on the board at the beginning of this year.
Okay, so why don't you ask your questions next then, if you have questions for Aaron.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, and just a couple of questions, and because I was following this as it was sort of moving along through the process, and so this was, and I know you mentioned that you looked at this sort of broadly with the idea that it can always get narrowed when it at town meeting. What areas would you see just potentially that it's areas that just looking at it that you would see it to be more broad versus an area that could potentially be narrowed down, if at all?
Yeah, I think it would be the geography. So in my opinion, not everybody, and I think at the selectmen's meeting, I believe it was Mr. Duggan, who is on our meeting here as well. I think he commented, I apologize if I've got that wrong, but somebody spoke up and said, I'm not sure that R1 is an appropriate district for this type of use. Again, we think that's self-regulating based on the regulations. But nonetheless, so we're including it here as permitted, but should somebody on the floor of town meeting or the planning board tonight, for that matter, feel that it's something that should be narrowed in scope, the amendment has been worded such that you can make that move.
Just if everyone could mute their mics while we're getting some feedback by papers being shuffled, I think. Thank you.
Okay. And just an additional question I had with respect to the with respect to the enforcement action that was that sort of prompted this whole discussion. This currently affect that because it's you indicated that was in R2, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess, was there a question there about what is the status of the court case at the moment?
Not the status, I guess, in terms of how would this potentially affect that affect that use. So you would have they would have to go through at least as it's currently prepared, they would have to go through the Board of Health procedure.
Yeah, so I don't believe any other type of local bylaw other than a zoning bylaw has any sort of grandfathering associated with it. So anybody out there now whose keeping of animals would be regulated by this will have to, over time, as their permits expire and time to renew, will have to come into the system. This particular situation is currently still under appeal. I believe the Raceleys are on the call can give us an update. I think Attorney McCann, I also saw on the list of participants, is representing the Raceleys. So, but I think right now, basically, because we've told the court that we have prepared a amendment to the zoning bylaw for town meeting's consideration. So we've been able to kind of hold the court date at bay. That said, both the town and the applicant or the appellant are spending funds on attorney's fees associated with this while we kind of wait to see what happens with town meeting. Again, town meeting were to vote in the affirmative as drafted here, the applicant would have the ability to apply for the Board of Health permit.
Okay. Okay, very good. And there's just one final question. This is more just, I guess, a procedural question. In reviewing other materials here for the, other zoning bylaw amendments, I believe to section 40, there was reference to animal husbandry still in those sections. I assume that if this gets passed by town meeting, then that will get, those would be revised for the subsequent town meeting, correct?
Yeah, David and I actually had this conversation today and don't want to presume. So in this article is kind of developed as a standalone, and so is that the article. And we just basically, if town meeting acts and it's in the affirmative, then obviously we don't need to strike some of those definitions because they would have already been dealt with. But we didn't want to assume town meeting was going to vote one way or another. So we're just using the base book as we're going into town meeting.
Understood. That's sort of what I thought, but I was just a little confused. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, Mr. Chair, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Peg, do you have any questions?
I'm trying to remember the meeting last October. I know this has been an issue for a long time. We all still talk about the chicken amendment many years ago. But basically what this will do is change the definition of animal husbandry, will allow the keeping of animals in all the zoning districts that all the residential zoning districts that we have. And thirdly, would move the permitting from the planning board to the Board of Health. Am I understanding it all correctly? So the planning board would no longer be involved.
Not from the planning board, this is a ZBA. When it's a special permit, it's a ZBA special permit, and they would be out of this completely.
They would be out of the loop, so it would be Board of Health. Okay, that was my understanding before. So I think this is fine. I think this is straightforward, and we've been talking about this for a very long time.
Okay. Jim, any questions, comments?
The only question I had was how do we determine a pot-bellied pig is a household pet? Sounds kind of dangerous.
Got that question at the selectmen. I'm not sure I answered it any better than I will now, but basically it is shockingly common to have pot-bellied pigs as domesticated animals. They are housebroken, and I don't think they get enormous like other pigs do. They stay small, and so it is.
My brother had one, Aaron, in his house. My brother had one in his house for about maybe 6 weeks, and then it went outside. They got very big. It had to be about probably 80 pounds.
Well, if we want to take that off the list, you won't offend me. But we were trying to come up with a fairly good example of the list. As it says, it's including but not limited to, and that is one of those animals that you can find at the pet store down the way. And we figured we should cover that. One thing it does not cover, which the person pointed out to me, was snakes and reptiles. And again, I guess in a way that's a good example of how you try to come up with everything and you miss something. So again, key language here is including but not limited to, but we can certainly add or delete from this list if the board feels that appropriate.
Well, is there other guidance from other towns or other examples of what other cities and towns do, or what do we use for a model here?
Yes, we did use several models, and we also backed that up with some of the extension school program literature. But to be honest, Jim, I can't tell you what 15 towns we looked at, but that's pretty much what we do as part of the process is just jump in on any number of towns. But so I can't give you the list off the top of my head, but we definitely did that, and it was not one or two. We definitely looked at several communities to make sure we got these definitions, well inside the lines.
Do you think that council may want, since you're listing some, I know it's included but not limited to, I like the idea of reptiles because obviously there's a lot of reptile pets. There's a lot of lizards. There's a lot of turtles and snakes. So, I mean, I'm okay with those. I don't know about the pig, though. I'm not crazy about the pig idea because I think, I'm not sure how, if you have an apartment and you got a pig in there or you've got, it just, no. Doesn't work for me, but who am I to say? That's my opinion. That's it.
Okay, I don't have any other follow-up questions, so I know there's several members of the public, David, that wanted to speak, or Josh that wanted to speak, so feel free to introduce them as you're aware that when they wanted to speak.
Sure thing, Mr. Chair. Josh, do you want to start, or should we just go alphabetically? I'm not sure if there was an order here.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Yeah, sure. The first member of the public I thought was Miss Brittany Raisley. Is that correct? Am I saying her name correctly? She asked to join the meeting. I'm not sure if she wanted to speak. She's muted right now, but she unmuted, so I guess that would be the opportunity, Ms. Raisley.
Hi, thank you for calling on me. I just wanted to say that I obviously am in favor of the amendment and that the Board of Health regulations are adequate for keeping of animals, and it can be done very successfully. And, I just hope that you guys will approve it.
Okay, thank you. Joshua would be next.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Is Mr. Matthew Duggan is here. Mr. Duggan, did you wish to speak on this matter?
Yes, please.
To the chair.
Mr. Duggan, go ahead. Yep.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, I'm town meeting member, Precinct 1. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this warrant article. It's number 7, the keeping of animals. And so I also received the booklet today for town meeting, but I have had the opportunity to look at the language that was presented to the selectmen last week. And what I find troubling is its ambiguity that's very similar to what the existing bylaw is. And we know that back in 2018, and not sure if I'm correct when I say that both Attorney McCann and Attorney DeLuca both spoke to the existing bylaw about its how it was open to interpretation. And that's, I think, how it ended up in the land court, where the land court also confirmed that it sided with the building inspector, even though it mentioned that it could have gone the other way. So that's probably the thing that strikes me first and foremost, is that it doesn't have clear definitions. Let me speak specifically about my concern, and it has to do with R1. I'm not in favor of this article, including Res 1 in its language. And I say that because it's common knowledge that the lots in Residential 1, which includes most of Precinct 1, most of Precinct 2, a little bit of Precinct 3, these lots are all what can be considered undersized. So we're talking 5, 6, maybe 7,000 square feet at most. And Mr. Henry did mention that there's probably exceptions to that. But for the most part, we know that it's the oldest part of town in terms of development. And when we talk about these animals, we're talking about farm animals. And for anyone who's ever worked on a farm knows that there's issues with farms in terms of odors, with insects, rodents. I could go on and on. So when I think about bylaws, I think what's the worst case scenario, what that's allowed by right. So I see that in this change, it talks about table 2. So that's kind of the dimensional table, and it defines the setbacks. I think that's directly related to the structures, right? So stables, pens, etc. Those are structures that require building permits. And there are setbacks in R1, I believe. Side setbacks are 8 feet. So we know that oftentimes the ZBA will cut that in half. So it's 8, but they'll give you 4. So now we're talking about structures that are very close to the property line, and in R1 that could be just several feet from an adjacent property owner's house. And also for the animals themselves, they're not confined to that setback, so they can actually come right up to your fence. So that, again, just a few feet from your house. In the summertime, you have these large animals, and it could be anything. It talks about animals that aren't allowed, which is basically wild animals. So we're talking, it specifically says alligators, monkeys, tigers, and lions. So thank God we're not going to allow those types of animals. But just about anything else, I think, is fair play. So we're talking cows, horses, alpacas, llamas, sheep, goats, you name it. And the size of those animals, and specifically to the waste. And that's something that would trouble me, is the runoff after a storm like we're having today, where you have the animal waste migrating off the property into adjacent yards. To me, that's a kind of a worst case scenario. So again, I'm against including R1 for this Article 7. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Josh, who's next?
There's a couple people from the public who asked to join the meeting. I'm not sure, they didn't indicate if they wanted to talk about this particular item specifically. So I guess I would ask the public if anyone still remaining in the meeting. Okay, it looks like Attorney McCann, would you like to speak? Unmuted. I'm not sure.
Ms. McCann, we can't hear you.
Perhaps while Attorney McCann is setting up, Mr. Skinner, did you want to speak on this item?
I just wanted to say that I was here to support Brittany Raisley. I think she's done a fine job with her goats. One of them that recently passed away. So I hope that you'll strongly consider supporting this amendment.
Okay, thank you.
And just another person from the public, I don't know if Ms. Sandra Brown would like to discuss this matter, or if she was interested in discussing the next item. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm also in support of letting Ms. Raisley and the family keep the goats.
Okay, thank you. Does Attorney McCann want to speak, or is she having technical
Might
problems?
be easier to, if you log out and come back in like Mr. George did, that seemed to do the trick.
Okay, I'll try that.
Oh, no, you're
Actually,
back.
we can hear her.
Now,
I can
Nancy.
hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Assuming that you can hear me now. Yes, I am here on behalf of Brittany Racely. You have heard from her already this evening. And we do recommend and request your support of this zoning amendment that the planning staff has been working on for quite some time, since the original enforcement action back in 2018. And the language that's being proposed for this zoning amendment does in fact clarify the issues that gave rise to that original issue before the Board of Appeals and then ultimately in court. It is still pending before the Court of Appeals, and this zoning amendment would address that that situation and take care of the issue. And really, what the issue was a lack of clarification in the prior bylaw, as the bylaw is worded right now, as it relates to animal husbandry and animals that are otherwise pets. And as Aaron stated initially, there was not a definition in the bylaw for household pets. And the goats that animals that can be are those household pets, as opposed getting into animal husbandry use that was not permitted in their zoning district. So this bylaw amendment clarifies that by giving you a definition of what household pets are, and then for animals that don't fall within the house category, it in the residential zoning districts a way to regulate through the Board of Health. I would argue is the appropriate entity for governing the keeping of animals, which is consistent with how other towns look at this as well. And I would agree with initially what Aaron Henry had said about the different zoning districts. There are certainly a wide variety of lot sizes in R1 as well as in R2 and R3. And the situation can be regulated specifically through the Board of Health regulations. So this zoning amendment, we would ask you to support. It clarifies some of the ambiguities in the existing zoning bylaw and would allow for the keeping of animals, which really is part of the agricultural heritage of Danvers and is becoming popular and has been popular for the keeping of animals as uses consistent with residential uses as well. So we would certainly request your support of this zoning amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any email correspondence from the public? Josh or David?
Mr. Chair, there is no email.
Okay. Has everyone from the public got a chance to comment?
I believe, yes, I believe so. Yes.
Okay, so
On this matter, yeah.
why don't I bring it back? Does any other board member have any follow-up questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Tori.
Well, this is,
Lou, I'm sorry.
It was Lou, sir. No problem. And I guess this is just a question for staff, just with respect to, just to address, and I believe that Attorney McCann touched upon it, but with respect to Mr. Duggan's concern about the sort of about setback and size issues with respect to the keeping of animals, what would be the sort of how would the Board of Health deal with a situation such as that? Would it be a matter of, would they be able to regulate, you know, like the size of a pen or disposal of waste or that sort of thing?
Yep. The Board of Health regs really focus on waste management, pen location, And then where's the food, what's the food management for the animal? So again, the zoning bylaw will require that your structures associated with these animals, whether that's a rabbit coop or something larger like a horse stable, those are minimum standards, and the Board of Health will have the ability, if it's not proper, to put your chicken coop at the 8-foot line and your house is 150 feet away. I'm certain that would be part of the process to evaluate whether or not that's a good setup. So again, the zoning standards are minimum thresholds, and the Board of Health, through their permit process, will further evaluate the site plan and the details of that site plan. Basically, again, focusing on where's the food going to be, where's the animal spending the night, and what are you doing with the manure?
And I think, sorry, Mr. Chairman, in lieu, I'd ask of Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Board of Health would have the opportunity on an extremely small lot to simply not permit the keeping of animals, correct? So if I have a 2,000 square foot lot and it's just physically not possible for me to keep animals on that site, that may not be permissible.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So that would address any concerns then. I guess that would be irrespective of whether you were in residence 1, 2, or 3. It would just more, so the Board of Health would have the ability to make that call. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further questions.
You're welcome. So let me just have a follow-up to that. So for the household pet, and we use the pot-bellied pig as the example, potentially being in an apartment building, there's a permit to house that animal, correct or no?
No. So again, household pets, I mean, you have to license a dog.
Yeah.
I believe that's the only household pet that the municipality regulates right now. So again, you may already have a pot-bellied pig. We don't know you have it. And you may have a boa or tarantula, or I've got 8 fish over there. So we're not registering those. So again, that's in the court case, kind of, household pet came to be basically something that customarily spends the night in your home, whether that's in a tank or an aquarium or in a crate. That's kind of a different thing. So that's, and that, to pick on the poor pot-bellied pig, that's one of those things that people do get. We don't permit them now, or I should say, we don't regulate them now. And those household pets will continue to be unregulated with the exception of dogs, which require licensing under Mass General Law.
So if an abutters have an issue with one particular animal, what's their recourse? Do they have, I mean, at least with a dog, they can ask for assistance because they're, you need a license, right? We've had situations where dogs have been a problem for neighbors, right?
Yep. As far as I know, that is the only MGL related to a particular species of animal. So you can have a nuisance dog hearing is, I think, the formal name for that process. And the town's gone through a couple of those in the last few years. As far as other animals in the house, I assume your question.
Yeah, in the house.
In the house. That would be a nuisance to the Board of Health. That'd be a nuisance complaint to the Board of Health, and they have a number of MGLs that give them jurisdiction on how to handle that.
Okay.
So that with no change there. I mean, that's the rules today. That'll be the rules tomorrow. This is how do we deal with and what do we want to do about the animals that are spending the night outside in the yard.
Okay.
And again, most of these, I understand there's a wide variety and we could get some exotic examples. But for the most part, the calls are for everyday agricultural animals with fairly deep history in this region. Again, it's goats and chickens, some rabbits. There are a few people that want to keep, more than just the pet rabbit. It's a little bit more than that. So again, I'm not going to say that you're not going to get somebody that wants to have 3 deer or 2 llama. But generally speaking, 80% of the inquiries we receive to town are chickens, goats, and again, maybe an occasional cow. We have a process for horses. This subsumes that. So it's not a lot. I mean, and we would like to see a few people do a little bit more of it. It's a popular hobby and we want to address it. But I don't think this is a watershed kind of an event that we have to worry about being inundated. But Mr. Duggan's points are well, those are good questions. And it is our hope that the Board of Health permitting process is robust enough to nip those off before they come into being. And if not, the process is enough to make those corrections if they are identified. But again, a lot of these uses have been happening and will have been happening the whole time. I mean, we have cows, we have goats, we have horses. And generally speaking, most of the everyday people in town don't know that there are occasional issues with them, and we deal with them. And those are traditionally things that I think we like about the town and want to continue. And this bylaw hopefully clarifies that a little bit, and that the town supports it.
Okay. That was helpful. Any other questions? Jim, Peg, you guys have any follow-up questions?
Nope.
I don't.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Oh, okay.
Second. So motion by Jim, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is that Tori? Okay, so roll call vote. Peg,
Yes.
Tori,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I'm in favor of closing the public hearing. Now I'll entertain a motion to approve a positive recommendation to the town meeting on this article. Is there a motion to make a positive recommendation on proposed zoning amendment to the town of Danvers zoning regarding animal husbandry and associated definitions? Is there a motion to approve this amendment
So
and
moved.
forward to town meeting?
Yes, so moved.
We have a first and a second. Roll call vote. Jim,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Peg? Peg, I didn't hear you. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Tori?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm in favor as well. So the motion carries to be forward positive recommendation to the town meeting. Thank you. So the next item is number 3. I think this is a continuation of the public hearing that we had at the last meeting, but let me just read it into the record. Proposed zoning amendments to the town of Danvers zoning bylaws, which includes administrative, section 2, site plan approval, section 4, definitions, section 40, charter-based zoning district updates, new civic space zoning district, as well as updates to the cluster development bylaw, overview of the proposed zoning amendments by planning staff. So David, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure thing, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. I think the plan is to pick up where we left off last time, which was with definitions, and then double back with any questions anyone had on specific items we either already covered or new information. So with that said, let's see if I can make this work. All right. So can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. Again, I think I mentioned this briefly last time. We are looking to update the definition section of the zoning bylaw with adding a few new definitions, namely definitions for principal use and accessory use, which currently weren't in there, I believe. We would like to move the definitions from section 22, which is currently the Maple Street overlay zone, to section 40 with all the rest of the definitions of the zoning bylaw, or most of them. And also, there are specific definitions mostly related to landscaping from section 4, which is site plan review. We'd also like to move to the definition section. So we found a number of those. They include definitions for vegetative screening, but also things like trees and shrubs, and other landscape items. What I did want to point out was there's a number of definitions for dwelling units. So the way the current bylaw reads, it's dwelling unit, comma, single family, dwelling unit, comma, two family, etc. as we go down the list. The Maple Street overlay also had a number of definitions that were very similar. So just for clarity, if you're reading through and looking at the red lines, we had to do some moving around of certain items to incorporate all of them into one. And it ended up being that the current bylaw has a definition for multiple family dwelling, while Maple Street has a definition for multi-family dwelling, and they are in fact different. So I just wanted to point that out in case it was confusing to anybody trying to go through the material. Other than that, that's pretty much it. It's not a whole heck of a lot going on. Like I said, we added a site coverage definition as well, but if there's any specific questions related to certain definitions, happy to take questions on those.
Any questions for David?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, hearing none, I will.
Yep, I have a question for Mr. Fields. This is Matthew Duggan.
Go right ahead, Mr. Duggan.
Yep. So these definitions, these are going to town meeting in November? What? How?
That's correct. These would not be for the October town meeting.
Okay.
These would be for the town meeting following that.
All right, good enough. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark Goldstein. Is this an appropriate time to ask some questions from the public?
Sure. I mean, if you have a question on this section, go right ahead, or you can hold your question until we finish the entire presentation. It's up to you. Do you have a question on the definition section?
I do, specifically about this slide. In the materials that we received about the changes, we didn't see a red line for section 22, and I don't know if that was an oversight, but do I understand that definitions in section 22 are also being consolidated into section 40?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Sure, that's correct, Mr. Goldstein. We did not move them. We can issue a red line with those being moved. However, should this update to section 40 fail, all the definitions for section 22 would still stand. So rather than issue a legal ad and a notice saying we're changing section 22's definitions, we're specifically doing it through this amendment. So if this doesn't go forward at town meeting, everything just stays the way it is.
Okay, so how would one know which definitions in section 22 are subject to moving to section 40?
All of them. So anything in section 22, there's a specific definition section. They're all being proposed to be moved or removed.
Okay, and do you know, for example, offhand, whether or not the definition in section 22 of a development site is one of those definitions?
I am scrolling through. That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Section 40, yeah.
Okay, and then I'll hold my other questions till the end of your presentation. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm pretty much there, so if you have any other questions.
And have not attended the last hearing. Is this the conclusion of your review of all of the proposed zoning amendments in this section?
No, there's no, I mean, if the planning board wishes to close the hearing tonight, they could do that. However, we're prepared to discuss this at the next meeting on the 27th of October.
Okay, and I'm sorry, maybe my question wasn't clear. Having missed the last, I just don't know where we are in the process. So have you already covered all of the, this is the end of your presentation with respect to your review of these zoning amendments in this section of the agenda item?
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you meant was I done with section 40. We had talked about these items on September 8th. We officially opened the public hearings on the 22nd. So so far we've taken them sequentially. So we've discussed section 2, section 4, section 33, which is the cluster development bylaw, and now we're on to the definitions section. But as I said, happy to double back on any of the other items.
So David, just for clarification, are there any other sections we're going to go over tonight, like the character-based zoning district, the new civic space zoning, or was that covered in prior meetings? Just for clarification purposes.
Correct. Yeah, we have not talked about the civic space zoning district yet.
Okay.
We're going to discuss that after this.
Okay. So
character-based zoning districts we discussed a little bit. As I said, it was more or less corrections, but if there's specific questions about that, happy to take those questions.
So why don't you finish all your presentation, then we'll double back to see if there's certain questions from the public and the board. And as you said, we have an opportunity to have more comments at the next meeting as well.
Sure. And I would say, just for the benefit of anybody watching at home, staff is happy to take written comment as well and pass it along to the board or address it as best we can by email or snail mail if you actually want to mail us something.
Great. That's helpful.
Sure.
So why don't you continue on, David?
Sure. So the next thing we'd like to discuss is slightly calling civic and open space. I say slightly because civic might get dropped. But this would be a new section for the zoning bylaw, section 26. Mr. Henry has also been working diligently on this, so I think at this time I'll turn it over to him if he's available.
Thank you, David. So we touched on this idea a while back, and I think we first brought this concept up in August and have worked it through the last couple of meetings. Feedback on this concept has been very positive. That said, we have gotten some interesting feedback about some of the particulars. And I think as we sit here tonight, knowing how much work we have to do between now and town meeting, I think we're getting a little bit of cold feet that this article might not be ready. Again, not because people haven't given us really good feedback, but it's unclear if we can get done what we need to get done to answer those questions in a timely fashion. And so I think our recommendation to you tonight from staff is going to be that we not advance this to town meeting yet, so that we can kind of make some of the refinements and breakouts between town-owned property, state-owned property, and federal property. We just don't have the time right now to do that. It's not particularly difficult, but just time-consuming. And we'd rather get this right. I think this is a really important concept. And based on the feedback, I think that it deserves that time, that we can get through and get into a finer grain analysis of it. There's also some potential tie-ins, as the slide says, with the town's water withdrawal permit. And I'd like to get some of those. Those questions are a lot more probing, and to be able to put that time in that's going to take to answer those questions over the next couple of weeks just doesn't seem likely. And again, I think this proposal, if we can get it right, we can do it once and do it right, as opposed to maybe doing it half-baked right now and not being able to get it over the finish line or having it come in, ineffective. So that said, again, at a high level, this is a concept that basically would acknowledge that the town does have open space in its inventory, that the land is undeveloped or largely unimproved, and that those properties contribute to the community's character in a meaningful way. And again, the concept here is expansive of, that's where the civic space comes from, in that some of these properties are fairly developed and are institutional in nature, but nonetheless, they do contribute positively to the community's civic life. So really, this was an attempt to put that on the zoning map, as your zoning map is this, I always say, it's like your idealized version of yourself. If the community was totally built out and everybody exercised their property rights, what would you be left with? And that's what your zoning map is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the road map, literally the picture of where you want to be. And presently, right now, we don't use open space as a concept in the zoning column. It's mostly zoned R1, 2, or 3, with some exceptions, but for the most part, we just hope that it doesn't end up being developed that way. And I think with the technology we have available at our fingertips these days, we should be able to produce an image of the community that reflects some of those uses. And I think a lot of the feedback we've gotten over the couple of, maybe 6 to 8 weeks that we've had this idea out there in the community has been very positive, but I think that they're looking for a little bit more detail on some of the differences between, an educational use and maybe an open space use versus, a utility use. And we think that that's a good, it's a good sign that people are asking us these in-depth questions. It means they're really considering the proposal on its merits and want to understand the details. And I think to do that, those questions justice makes it a better proposal, but it's going to take more time than we have at hand at the moment. So I am happy to take questions on this concept so that as we do that work, if there's additional comments that we should be addressing, we can do that. But at the moment, I think our recommendation to the board this evening is that the proposal not move forward past this public hearing.
So unless the other members of the board see it different, instead of confusing matters, my suggestion would be we just withdraw this piece, right, and focus on stuff that's going to potentially get to the floor of the town meeting. But before we do that, does anyone have a observation, a comment on the board on this particular piece? I want to keep it, there's a lot going on this one particular amendment. I'd like to just try to keep it focused on what's actually going to go forward potentially to the town meeting members. But I'll leave that up to the board if there's other comments. I know we have several members on the board that are town meeting members, so you're going to get a chance to weigh in here as well.
I think Mr. George has his hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Lou,
So,
go ahead,
yeah,
Lou.
this is just a quick procedural question, Aaron. What would be the timing for this then? So assuming that you have to work, that this additional time, would this be going into the warrant for the annual town meeting?
That would be my desire, would be to kind of keep the momentum going. Knowing that we don't necessarily control that warrant, the town manager and the selectmen are very happy to give us the fall. And that's kind of the plan more or less going forward, is that our material will be reserved for the fall. But in theory, if we need to and need it, want it to go forward, they're amenable to us using the spring. Again, like last year with COVID, I don't know if there will be, a lot of extemporaneous material beyond the budget put on that agenda by the selectmen, as was their prerogative this spring. So again, but at a staff level, we want the work will not stop in hopes that it'll be prepared as soon as possible.
Okay, that's fine. I was just interested just in terms of a ballpark, in terms of when you were looking at it. That's all. Thank you.
Any other comments on this piece for Aaron?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Sure, go right ahead. Go ahead,
First of all, I'm very supportive of this idea and obviously trust staff opinion on when it is ready for town meeting. But procedurally, is this right now up to staff to withhold this for a later town meeting, or is there anything that we need to do? Or is this just up to selectmen?
And I'll also lean on David a bit for the procedural issues, but basically the board needs to close the public hearing procedurally when it's done with the conversation, and then just vote no action at this time. And the article will die and town meeting will not know it happened.
But that section though, Aaron, right? You have other stuff that you want to move forward under this amendment, right? To go into November. The way I'm reading this is there's several sections to this amendment.
I think.
Are you asking to withdraw the whole thing?
I believe it was advertised as proposed new section 26. Nothing associated with new proposed 26 would be moving forward.
Okay.
And I think that was a individually bulleted, advertised portion of this hearing. So that's okay, as long as the board, if the board agrees with staff's recommendation and doesn't move forward, as long as you close the public hearing, you've satisfied the procedural, and the vote would be to not go forward with this article. There's no further obligations under the law to this concept.
Okay. Other comments for Aaron? So David, what I'd ask, since we've got a few more minutes, can you just double back and talk about the stuff that has not administrative tweaks to it that we discussed at the last minute, just high level on the various sections? I know there was a lot of redlining issues for word choices, etc. But can you just provide one more time a little overview of what we're doing?
Yep, I can do that. So to start at the beginning, we're proposing updates to section 2, which is the administration section. Those mainly have to do with including the powers of the planning board, allowing updates to occur in typos or section headings or pagination without going back to town meeting. We're recommending that those two articles be collapsed. Originally, they were separate, but we're just suggesting making one update to section 2. I think after discussion internally, we didn't foresee a massive hiccup in part of the administrative section not going to town meeting. So with that being said, there was initially 2 items. One advertised as updates to pagination, heading, and numeration, allowing those edits to be made without going to town meeting, and the other was adding powers of the planning board and severability to that section. The next section to update sequentially was section 4, site plan review. We made a number of updates to that section. Happy to discuss those in more detail, but the large overview of that would be collapsing the 3-tiered major, minor, and administrative modifications into a 2-tiered, basically large design review, and a term intermediate review, which will be reviewed by staff for the most part. Moving forward from there, we talked about updates to the cluster development bylaw, which is section 33. I skipped a section, I'll come back to that. But section 33 mainly was an entire overhaul of the bylaw, and rather than pass along a red line version Aaron and I were discussing today, I think we'll just send you the clean version, and our recommendation is really at this point just repeal and replace. There wasn't much left at the end of the day to really send along a red line. It's pretty much just a new section. Sections 18 through 22, which are the character-based zoning districts, I think we touched on earlier, but again, there was a lot of minor updates in there, some very minor, meaning just cross-references. There was the one larger item I wanted to point out, which I think I did last time, was adding multi-family to the parking table. So it, for some reason, got left out. It just says mixed use, I believe, and we'd like to add multi-family back in. So there's a parking factor for multi-family going forward. And then lastly was section 40, the definition section, which we just discussed. I believe that was it. And if the board's will is to not move forward with civic space and open space, I think the only other thing left is the 2 owners petitions. So Aaron has a question.
Oh, and I just wanted to clarify again, I think for the definition section, there's a little bit of tweaking, but no intent to change any definitions, just literally, because we started that, we looked at that, and there's a whole, PhD's worth of work that could be done on some of those definitions. But I think we tried to respect the scope of the mission, which was find definitions in other sections of the bylaw. And again, we particularly found them in section 4, site plan review, and 18 through 22, and 22 in particular, and just move those to definitions. We're not changing them in any, again, I mean, I'm not going to say we didn't add a comma here or there, but there was no intent to change any of the definitions other than to clarify or rectify something when we had 2 definitions of the same thing, like we found with open space. But I think, again, in the track changes version, you'll see there that I don't think you'll find any substantive changes to definitions, just where one finds them in the bylaw.
Okay. Thanks for that overview. So if there are other questions or comments from the public before we go back to the board with that overview, I'd like to kind of open that up, David, if there's other questions from the public tonight.
I believe Mr. Goldstein and Mr. Duggan are the only two members from the public. If either of them have anything further.
This is Mark Goldstein. I'll yield to Mr. Duggan first, since I've already spoken on this, and then I'll follow up for him.
Mr. Duggan, do you have any questions on or comments on what we just talked about? Okay, if not, Mr. Goldstein, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I jumped in a little early, so I didn't get to introduce myself. My name is Mark Goldstein. I'm a land use attorney at Beveridge and Diamond. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, the members of the board, and the planning staff for having us. Obviously, these are unusual circumstances, so we very much appreciate your ability to get this done. I have a couple of specific questions, but let me start with, can you just run through what you think your timing and process will be from this date forward for these zoning amendments, understanding that the first two are on a different track, as I understand it?
Go ahead, David. Why don't you try to answer that?
Sure, I'll try my best. As you know, members of the board, Mr. Goldstein, so we have two town meetings running, not necessarily simultaneously, but pretty close to it. So as you mentioned, there's items to go forward October 26th and items to go forward November 16th. So from here on out, I believe Aaron and I'll throw him into the boat with me. We'll be going to visit the Finance Committee. We'll be going back to the Selectmen, and then we'll have another meeting with the Planning Board on October 27th. The Finance Committee meeting, I believe, is Monday the 19th. Is that correct, Aaron?
I'm trying to pull up our calendar that we were just looking at today.
Yeah.
It's disappeared. One second.
Sure. Sorry to put you on the spot. Slightly more difficult now that we have two calendars.
Understood. And if it helps, and you're just answering for me, I don't particularly need that date. I'm mostly interested in where we're headed to the town meeting, which one, and what would the next planning board. And I think you've answered those, so you don't need to struggle for that other date.
Okay, sure. I do believe the Finance Committee is the 19th, however, and the Selectmen will be meeting on the 20th, so the following night. And we'll be at the Planning Board the following week.
Okay. And the intent then would be for the planning board to take up these zoning amendments on the 27th, and then presumably take whatever action it's going to take in advance of the town meeting on November 16th.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the board. That's, I believe.
Yeah, but that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So we'll probably keep the public hearing open so that there's other comments before that particular meeting, the last meeting in October, and we'll make a decision about how we move forward.
Idea.
Okay, thank you.
Select board takes up warrant review for the November town meeting on 10/20.
Okay.
And FinCom will be November 5th.
Thank you for the clarification on process. I think it was Mr. Fields who was speaking. We were talking about the overview and the intent of consolidated definitions in section 40. And I believe, and I forget if it was you or Mr. Henry, said that the intent was really to consolidate them and not to make substantive changes. So as I look at the definition of development site in section 40, there's redlining that seems to indicate, and as I compare it to others, a change in that in a substantive way. Can you talk to what your intent was? And I'm looking at on the red line, there's the blue highlight that seems to indicate that there's new language being added.
Sure, I'm looking at it as well. So one of the items that we wanted to try to ensure going forward was there's specific references in some of these definitions to other sections of the bylaw. A number of them were to a section 18. So when this definition was written, the Maple Street traditional neighborhood overlay was section 18. So that has since moved to section 22. So in any event, those sections of the definition either are referencing the new section 18, which might be an incorrect reference, or section 22, which has been moved. And then looking at it from here, I think there's another reference to site plan approval, which, I mean, again, it doesn't need to be referenced in a definition of what a development site is.
I guess specifically, as those I understand, that makes sense to me. At the very start of the definition, and I apologize, I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at my other screen. It now reads one or more parcels or lots, whether or not in common ownership, under unified development control. And that looks like it's a strikeout and change, and based on my reading of the definition in another location, that's a change. Am I correct that's a change?
Looks like a change. I think the past read one or more building lots.
And didn't reference the common ownership. So can you talk to what the thinking was in making that change?
Sure. So often, applicants will come in with a purchase and sale agreement and may or may not own the entirety of their site or separate portions of their site. I think we just wanted to clarify it's a unified development site under, I believe it's section 18.9, where it shows you the table of development sites.
And Dave, if I can jump in, I would assume that we need signatures of owners if they don't have fee control. You would have the signature of a property owner who only has a PNS on a site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and that's helpful. And I apologize coming a little late to the party, but the revisions to section 4, the site plan review, not site plan approval, or vice versa, are fairly significant. Can you talk for a minute about those changes or the impetus for those changes? And I guess, and another question would be, are any of those changes the result of prospective developments or actually developments that have been proposed?
I'll take the last one first. It wasn't a reactionary approach from us. There was no development site that is waiting in the wings that we know about that we were looking to change section 4 for. It was really based on, I'm just going to open up the article while I speak. It's really based on past permitting history of what we've been seeing for the board, and then I think staff's experience in other communities. So just so you're fully aware, we have a fairly new staff here in Danvers, and some of the changes to site plan we were recommending fall more in line with I'd say the larger view taken by some other cities and towns in terms of neighborhood and community impacts, as opposed to the smaller catch-all review approach that we have going currently.
What do you mean by the smaller catch-all review?
For the most part, any commercial site or anything less than or greater than a duplex for residential development pretty much has to go to site plan review.
Okay. And it looks like much of the substantive criteria, so the general criteria that one would apply in site plan, for those of us who do this on a regular basis, has been taken out and replaced with sort of other, what was the thinking there?
Yeah, I think we wanted to just simply flesh out the criteria a bit more. So often many of the questions that come up from the board have to do with landscaping, the circulation on the site. So I'm going through the criteria that we have now proposed, which was stormwater and drainage, screening and lighting. So to specifically address most often what comes up for the applicants and the board, and how to go through the subjective criteria for those.
Okay.
I think we previously had 6 criteria. We've fleshed that out to 9, and they're substantially, I guess you could say, longer, for lack of a better term.
I think if I may jump in, I mean, I think it's that we also want to be more specific. Like David said, looking at the files and participating in these permitting processes ourselves, we know what the board's looking for, what the community's looking for, and rather than have kind of 6 things that can be, wordsmithed into, these are what we're looking for. And I think that I think that's a better approach. I'd rather be a little more specific and have 9 criteria than 6 vague criteria that, don't really do the job or fit, it's one size fits all. So again, I think I'm encouraged with these changes just because I think of the specificity and the focus on what we're seeing and what we're dealing with.
So the intent is really to streamline, right? To create a better roadmap to the applicant, to help them through this process a little quicker. Is that one way to interpret this from the staff's perspective as well?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's not an accurate assessment. I think it's streamlining, but I think it's also clarity for the board to administer the process too.
Yeah, okay.
And I guess more generally, the amendments that are now in front of the planning board, do you foresee any situations where those changes could negatively impact the downtown core area, which is sort of obviously was a big piece of the rezoning and overlay district to begin with?
Sure, and I'll just repeat that to understand your question. So are you asking about unforeseen consequences that may occur in development in the downtown if these changes go forward?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. I don't believe so. I think I mentioned last time to the planning board, given the way the character-based zoning districts bylaw is shaped, for the most part, unless you have a fairly large lot and you're doing a fairly small project, most likely you're asking for discretionary permitting for the planning board anyway, which means a special permit. So automatically you're coming to the planning board for that special permit. That said, we also added other triggers into this section. So we didn't have a trigger for site coverage before, and we didn't have a definition for site coverage. So there'll now be another trigger for site coverage. So while it may appear on the outside that we're eliminating certain size structures, we're actually adding new triggers for impervious surface, site coverage, and I believe a few other things that weren't previously in there. So I don't foresee many, if any, projects being able to essentially apply and hit the ground with just a building permit going forward, specifically in the downtown. There may be some, as I said, if you had a larger site and you were doing a pretty de minimis project, you may be able to just pull a building permit, but for the most part, the way it's structured, you're more or less going to the planning board.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if that answers the question about negatively impact, but it'll be reviewed by.
Yeah, I mean,
Many of us, they're not unintended consequences if we could foresee them. We've done our best to eliminate negative consequences to these articles, but I think if we knew and had the crystal ball, we would have a slightly different proposal in front of us. So unfortunately, it's always a little bit of trial and error, but we have future-proofed our work as best as possible.
Understood, and I appreciate that. I think that's all the questions I have for tonight. I appreciate the fact that you'll be reconvening on these, and I assume we can provide additional feedback and have conversations with staff in the meantime.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out or email or phone call.
Terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there's no more public comments, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any follow-up questions? And what I'd like to do is continue this to our next meeting in October so we can continue to get whatever feedback that's necessary before the town meeting, the town meeting objectives.
Looks like Lou.
Go ahead, Lou.
And this is just a sort of a follow-up question. Just was, because I know you were talking about David with respect to site plan review, and I just was wondering. I was looking at some of the earlier language, referred to such things as the old 4.6 referred to noise, fumes, glare of lights, for example, and then the new 4.4 obviously includes a lot of discussion with respect to lighting screening, landscaping, but it didn't refer to such things as sort of noise or fumes. And I'm not sure if I was missing something or whether there was sort of an intention to sort of remove those sort of kind of qualitative pieces out.
Sure. Thanks, Lou. I don't think it was intentional to remove those for any particular reason. I guess for us, those are more nuisance complaints, and I think we've had quite a number of discussions at recent meetings, but pretty much since I've been here about, I don't want to say Danvers' lack of, but we really don't have a noise ordinance bylaw. So really at this point, it's a nuisance complaint situation. So that being said, we didn't include it in site plan. However, if you'd like us to look at that for next time, we can certainly add that back in. Fumes, we can also add back in. I think, at least to me, that read more of it harkened back to the days of separation of uses based on nuisance. So, for instance, if you're going to put your tannery in the middle of a neighborhood, doesn't come up too often now, but as a safety measure, we could certainly add that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering whether or not there was whether or not there was sort of an intention on sort of removing those pieces, because obviously lighting is certainly covered, and sort of it seems like certainly the steps to sort of prevent problems with noise and other sort of adverse environmental impacts, I think, are there, but I wasn't sure whether or not we want to include something something more specific.
Yeah, we can come up with something for next time, certainly. If not, simply use the old language that was already in there. But as you rightly pointed out, it seems like as of late and probably going forward, the big one is lighting.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea too, David. Trying to revisit that. Right.
Okay. Sure.
Other comments for David?
Again, I'm on the administrative section also, Mr. Chairman. And I noticed that the old language, it specifically told the routing of the documents, the town engineer would respond. We always send it to fire, building inspector, et cetera. And I may have missed it. I was looking for new language. If that was needed, that would be part of our review process.
Thank you, Peg. You're looking at section 2, administrative? Oh, or the administrative section of section 4.
I'm looking at
section 4, David.
Section 4, yeah.
Sorry, not to get.
I'm sorry. I'm in site plan review. I had one question in administrative too. I am sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm looking at. Let's see. Yeah.
While David pulls that up, I would just say we had this a similar conversation, or David and his staff did, with the conservation. I think it was the Conservation Commission. That's really an administrative function. I mean, a lot of those paragraphs remain in local bylaws, I think, because back when they were written, most towns did not have any professional staff, and it was needed to point like a volunteer board with no staff to remind them to work with others. I think the benefit of where we're at is we have a strong administrative review process. We would route these things whether that was in the bylaw or not, and that's, in an odd way, we're actually emphasizing that right now. I mean, we're working really, really closely with the engineering division. We're convening TRCs at a much smaller, more frequent level than we have. That's one of the changes that David and I have really been working on, is to get that internal review process strengthened up. It's good. It was good when we got here, but it can be more robust and minimize some of the issues that we are seeing at the end of the construction process. When that coordination starts to fray. And for us, David and I, philosophically, that starts at the front end. And so again, that's been a point of emphasis within our group. But that said, we feel the language is not needed in the bylaw. It's really an administrative function of the review process, and I think it's superfluous to what we're doing.
And I think if it's anything to add, I also mentioned to the Conservation Commission, we sort of don't like to advertise, especially in a bylaw, that we'd be referring you to another board or committee. Prior referral, as it is, can go a little sideways really quick. You know, if one board says, well, we're not going to vote on this until you go see the other board, and the other board says, well, we don't want to comment and we're not going to vote on it either. You know, the applicant's sort of left in this limbo land. So I think while on the backside of this, staff is doing even probably more reviews than we had in the past, we didn't want to mention necessarily that we're sending you to another board, commission, or a specific person in that instance. So hopefully that helps to answer that question.
Well, you know, unfortunately, I'm not an engineer. So when we were looking at site plan review, I really value the engineer's opinion. And I know that in past we've had cases where we have said to the applicant, go work it out between the engineer and yourself. So I just wanted to make sure that that would continue, because I'm a planner, an urban planner, but I'm not an engineer. So I rely especially on engineering, fire, and I just wanted to make sure that continued. You know, if it's administrative, that's fine. If I know that's going to continue, that's fine. The other thing that I think was missing, that was probably not missing, but I just wanted it explained, and one of the things that we developed a number of years ago for applicants was the package where we have the check off of everything that they have to do. And I think that was in, I don't know, it must have been in site plan originally. There must have been something in there. Because I looked at the red line, so, and I don't have, unfortunately, my iPad's still down, so I don't have a copy of what I just made a bunch of notes when I was reading it. But, you know, the package directed the applicant what to do, how to do it.
Peggy, you
I
referring
remember they would ask for waivers on certain things.
Because we do get an application checklist, I think, as part of the form. David, you would, I think, is that the checklist?
So that's correct, and I think additionally, Peg, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but it was a whole litany of items in the current bylaw that says how many plans to submit, what size those plans should be.
Yes.
So those items we intentionally would like to take out of the bylaw itself and add them to your regulations. And again, with the point being, and I stress this, I think for not site plan, but a couple other things that we've done, is we would like the board to have the ability to update those requirements without having to go back to get a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So if you decide you don't need 10 black line copies and 24 by 36, but you want 6 blue line copies and 48 by 48, now you'd have to go back to town meeting to ask for that.
Okay.
Whereas if we put that in your regulations, that'll be your own book that the applicants will have to look at.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
And those sorts of things tend to move pretty quickly. As far as, you know, we don't need 10 copies anymore because, you know, most of the board is dealing with electronic plans, and we do electronic internal routing. So literally, you know, Attorney McCann comes into the office with a big paper box and all of these copies, and they sit there. And we'd like the ability to have the board deal with what we're looking for, what it wants at its level as a regulation. It doesn't mean the site plan reviews any more or less robust. It's just some of those details like that, you know, that granular. I don't think it's an appropriate scheme to have town meeting weighing in on if you guys want color copies or not.
Okay.
For the record, we do recycle.
Times have changed. That makes sense. We're all doing electronic. You're absolutely right. Let's see. Again, I'm a little concerned about the intermediate review of having 4 structures or less being an intermediate review. When I was going through that, I was trying to think of examples that we've had in the past for each one of those items that you have, and I'm going to have under intermediate review. And I do believe we should have intermediate review. You know, I had my famous story about how I had to go before planning board and site plan for modification for my deck for 8 boards and had to notify everybody within 300 feet. So, you know, I'm all for administrative review, but before I'm comfortable with any of them, I'm trying to think of examples that we've had previously or what could maybe muddy the water with that, would be some concern to me. So that's just something to note. And then lastly was just in the administrative section, which is why I said administrative when I began. We have 5 board members and an associate who can vote on special permit. ZBA, I was always under the impression, had 5 members and 3 alternates. Now, I did not look up the definition of alternate, but alternate, when I came on the board, I was told, which could have been right or wrong, meant that they could fill in for a board member if a board member wasn't there. So they had the option to vote on anything as long as it wasn't a full board. So I noticed that you changed both terminologies to associates. Maybe nothing, and I didn't look up the definition, but I do remember that very well. The difference, because I remember bringing it up, what's the difference between an alternate and an associate? So that's it. That's it for now, and I'll continue to go through all the things that you sent us. I have gone through it all so far.
Sure. Mr. Chair, if you would permit me, I might just share my screen really quick. I wanted to touch on something that Ms. Zielinski brought up. So with respect to the 4 units,
yes.
On that item, I just wanted to say, the way we structured this book, we were looking to, in an ideal world, for me, take out the unit count out of it, as it's more related to the site plan, the physics of the site, but I get where we're at. It's a big ask to move from a 2-unit building to a 4-unit building. I think we just wanted to move that up a little bit based on the fact that for the most part, if you can park a 3 or 4 unit building, it's really not that big of a difference from the duplex, so long as you don't need discretionary permitting. So pointing out the downtown situation, you almost always ended up needing discretionary permitting, so you'd find yourself getting reviewed by both staff and the planning board as well. But with respect to I'm just going to share my screen. Give me one moment. With respect to the size, I took a look at a few other communities. I know that's come up tonight, and I had mentioned it before, but I wanted to specifically call out in case you all were wondering what was going on behind the scenes. The size limits for a few other communities, in case it comes up now or later. Looked at Northampton, Beverly, Ipswich, and Andover, and there wasn't really any rhyme or reason particularly. It's just some of those communities have certain aspects that Danvers have, while they have certain aspects that Danvers does not have. So to put it out there and then just address it now, obviously the city of Beverly has different triggers, but most of those triggers are much larger than what we have here in Danvers. But for their smaller commercial zones, their trigger for site plan is 1,000 square feet for, I think, looks like 3 of their smaller commercial zones. But again, in their industrial zones, it's up to 25,000 square feet, which is very, very large, obviously, but I think that's their portion of Cherry Hill. So take that for what it's worth. But both Andover and Northampton have triggers starting at 2,000 square feet. Ipswich's trigger is starting at 2,500 square feet or 30% of existing gross floor area. So again, we did look at a few other communities where we were trying to keep in line with current practice in other communities. But that being said, Danvers is its own community, and I want to respect the history that has gone on here. So I just wanted to put that out there so it didn't seem like these were coming out of completely left field, in case anyone was.
I didn't think they were coming out of left field, David, but I think my concern, and has been not so much making a house into 4 units if it's 2 units. My concern is it says units and structure or development containing 4 or fewer dwelling units. And as I said before, I have seen, and we talked about the existing house, and I have to admit, this is not one of my favorite things that I see that we do, where you have an existing house and they put 4 condominiums in the back. Or now if we say 4 or fewer, we're going to see an existing house with 3 condominiums in the back, where they don't end up coming into site plan review.
Sure.
So that was my concern, and that's really my only concern. And as I said, I'm just trying to think of examples of what's come in, not just for that one, but for other things too, as I go through the site plan review. what I've seen happen over the years, so.
No, thank you for the feedback. I can address that a little bit at the end, but if any other board members have any questions, I don't want to dominate the time.
No, and you know what? We're going to have another public hearing on it too. So, I mean, so I'm fine with that. It's something that's just always on my mind, and I've been thinking about it as I go through this stuff.
Sure thing.
Okay. That's helpful. Anyone else have any comments tonight? David, did you have something you wanted to articulate, or?
Yeah, I was just thinking, to Peg's point, that's an excellent point. I think at our level, we were thinking more of the 6 Cherry Street project, where you have a big old Victorian and you're doing an interior fit up. But points well taken. We could amend the language for next time to exclude individual structures, so you're not adding more separated units on site. If you follow me there. So for instance, if you have a larger house on a larger lot and it's a duplex, and inside of that you want to make 2 units smaller to add another unit, that's a different situation than what you're describing as putting 4 condos in the back of the site. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, good. I think that's a good suggestion.
Sure.
Thank you.
So why don't we continue this, right, to the next meeting, right? Gives us more time to digest all the material. And we've got at least one more meeting before, we got to make a recommendation to town meeting. So is there a motion to continue this public hearing on proposed zoning amendments?
I move we continue the public hearing on zoning amendments.
Okay. Is there a second?
The second.
So we'll do a roll call. Jim, I see that you're back on camera. But before I do that, do you have any questions? I didn't want to skip you, Jim.
No, I was listening.
Okay. So a motion has been seconded to continue. Let's do the roll call. Jim?
Yes.
Peg?
Yes.
Tori?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
And I'm in favor as well. So thank you very much. Dates, David, I see that there's no minutes that were put into the package, even though it's on the minutes. So is there do you want to just kind of go over the dates one more time of what our expectation is over the next month, let's say?
Sure. For town meeting, I'm assuming you're...
Yeah, all those dates, right? Just so that we...
Sure. So, as I think I mentioned, Aaron and I will be at Finance Committee, I think on the 19th of October for the town meeting on the 26th of October. We'll be at the Selectmen's meeting on the 20th for the November 16th town meeting, I believe. The planning board will be meeting, and we'll talk about that on the 27th, as we just discussed. And then a Finance Committee meeting on November 5th for the November 16th town meeting. And a town meeting member workshop on Saturday, the 14th of November for the November 16th town meeting. I think I got them all.
Okay, so in that town meeting workshop, where's that going? How are we going to conduct that?
I don't know if we have a location right now. I'm assuming it's going to be at the high school.
Okay.
And I think in the past, we usually kind of do like a open house kind of format. Depending on how many people show up, we might do something be prepared to do something a bit more formal, but in the past, it depends on how many people come. I think will kind of, dictate how formal we make it.
Okay. All right. Any other matters?
I think Lou has a question.
Lou, go right ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a quick question. I know we just moved to continue this to the next meeting. I guess just a more of a procedural question. What about the civic space zoning piece? Is that are we continuing that as well, or do we need some action in terms of withdrawing that piece?
In theory, you could vote to close that hearing and make a recommendation. Again, you can do that in 2 weeks as well, but in theory, if the board's supportive of that, you could do that now.
So Lou, what I'd like to do is withdraw that at the next meeting, right? We address it all, so.
Fair enough. Yep.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other matters for the board that anyone wants to bring up? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Unless you guys all want
Adjourn.
All right, Peg, thank you.
Second.
Okay, all in favor for the motion to adjourn?
Aye.
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 You're all like
Okay,
little
thanks.
crickets.
Thanks for all the good work, yeah, for the staff. Appreciate all your hard work.